Well, thanks everybody. I want you to think about something. Oh, that's interesting. There's a lot of interesting thoughts in here. Not all of them appropriate, but hold on, because what I want to do is have everybody think about the same thing. Think about this. Think about the moment someone walks onto a stage and steps into the light. In that moment, what do you have? A bit of music starts and she lifts up on a toe. A door opens and he turns because he's surprised that he's not alone. A teleprompter starts to roll and the leader starts to share her dream. In that moment, you have theater. The first time a cave dweller leapt up onto a rock and said, "Hey, there's bison in the valley, and I say this time, let's go get one." It was theater. And we, band of speechwriters, we few, we proud, we are the ones who script the business and the political theater of our time. And it's an art that's as good as any play. Think about Shakespeare. What are the best, most memorable moments of any Shakespeare play? The sword fights? No, the speeches. When someone walks down stage and says, "Here's what it is. This is how it could be. Lend me your ears." We remember the speeches and the balcony scene, but it's the speeches. And done right, a speech can be as good as any play. And whether it is or not, whether it reaches that high and makes that moment, it all comes down to you and me and how much we believe we can make a difference. So think about this. Think about China in the 6th century. You're in the court of the Emperor Wu, who is the greatest Buddhist king of all time, according to him. And you've heard that there is a wandering monk in the neighborhood, and the emperor has invited him in for a talk. And so the emperor has the monk, shows him all his great works, the temples he's built, the scriptures he's read, his orange robes, his shaved head, and he says, "So monk, tell me, what is the karmic value of everything that I've done?" And the monk says, "None whatsoever." Okay, well, the monk, is saying whatever he has to say, and the emperor doesn't take no for an answer, so he asks it again. He says, "Okay, then, how do you build karmic value?" And the monk says, "I don't know." So now he's a little confused because this monk's supposed to be the hottest thing going. So the emperor says, "Then who stands before me?" And the monk says, "I have no idea." Now, if that sounds a little Zen, it's because this monk was Bodhidharma, who was the godfather of Zen. And he was a blue-eyed Indian who wandered up from India into China to mess with the minds of emperors. Well, I love that story because imagine having the balls to be in that situation and not feel you had to justify yourself to somebody. Imagine being in that situation and being able to say, "I don't know." So I'll do that. What makes a great speechwriter? I don't know. How do you write a great speech? I have no idea. Every time I sit down in front of a blank screen, I have no idea how to write a speech, none. What I do know is it will come. And I know this, the times when I've stood there and said, "Oh man, I got this one," those may be the times when I don't ask the right questions, and I don't dig deep enough, and I don't really sweat it out to write something that's truly great. But in that moment, that's what makes the difference. Now, I'm not a complete idiot. If I'm standing in front of a client, I can do the sales dance as well as anybody else. I can tell them how I'm going to improve the culture and improve the communications. But it's not because I know, it's because I'm playing the game. I was invited into, this was just a few months ago, let's just say one of the biggest companies on earth. a great company. And they've got, I think, a great CEO. He's new. But there's a problem. Every time he gets up onto the stage and starts to speak, he gets goofy. And it's a little weird that that's happening this late into his career, and is painful to watch. Can I help? I don't know. So I spend the day there. I interview with 5 executives. I coach a speaker. I learn that they've had 2 really well-known speech coaches in, and he hated them, hated working with them. It didn't work. So I must have passed some kind of a test, because I get sent up to the gatekeeper, the chief communications officer, and he says, so, how would you fix this? I have no idea. He says, no, I mean, what's your process? There is no process. And he looks at me, and I can see I've irritated him because he thinks I'm messing with him. But what do you want me to say? You've had 2 of the most well-known speech coaches in America in. They had processes. The processes didn't work. You want to try another process? There's no process. This is a human being with an ontological problem. The process is you sit with him, you watch him speak, you try to see the moment when you can see a thought go through his eyelid that changes what he's doing, and see if you can identify what happened and what went wrong. And if you can, then you work together and fix it. Or you don't. It's up to him. But there's no process. I'm not currently working with that organization right now. But I referred them to another speechwriter who has a patented process. Maybe this time it'll work. I don't know. So, I love this quote from Abraham Maslow. The story of the human race is the story of men and women selling themselves short. The story of the human race is the story of us selling ourselves short. It's what we do. We grow up believing that we have to justify ourselves to people. We grow up in the crib and we lie there and we think, I can't talk, I can't walk, I can't do any of the things these giants can do, and oh God, I just pooped my pants again. I must suck. Isn't that the original sin? The original sin is we decide that we are not worthy of love, and so we spend the rest of our lives selling ourselves short, when in fact, we were worthy all along. And that's really what my novel, The Downside of Up, is really about. It's about a corporate speechwriter, a freelancer, who looks like he's doing pretty well, but when the book opens, he's maybe one unpaid invoice away from being on the street. And it's the journey from selling himself short to finding the moment when every fiber in his body is telling him he sucks, and everyone around him is nodding in agreement. It's his journey to go beyond that and redeem himself. And that's really the story in every narrative. Somebody goes on a journey, sells himself short, and then has to redeem herself. It's the story of Anna Karenina. It's the story of George Costanza. It's the story of Willie Loman, and it's the story of Homer Simpson. And it's the story of Paul Lavalier, who is the speechwriter in my book. It's his journey from selling himself short to owning the stage on which he stands. Now, why a novel about us? Well, I guess you write about what you know. So here's how it happened. I was in Aruba, rehearsed inside the Seaport Convention Center, if any of you have ever been there, not where you want to be when you're in Aruba. Rehearsing an opening number for a hotel industry business conference. And somebody comes up to me and says, hey, I read the CEO's speech, really nice. But you know that part where you quote Dickens? Where you say the opening line of A Tale of Two Cities was, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times? Yeah? Well, I always thought those were the opening lines too, but it turns out they're not. What? Oh my God, I opened my laptop and I'm going through this what a poser, what a jerk. You know, actually, I didn't ever read the book. I saw the movie, but I always thought, online, I find it, I open it up, and wait a minute. I was right. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Right there at the top of the page. And it just kept going. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything in front of us. We had nothing in front of us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. On it went. And one sentence. And what that sentence said, I could have opened the entire conference with it. I could have opened my client's speech because it said everything that was going on in their industry at the time. But I didn't. Closed it up and went back to rehearsals. So that was the first part. The second part was this. A little later in that day, I'm talking to one of the division presidents. And I make a joke. I say, you know, I don't want to be a speechwriter all my life. No. My dream job, I want to be a failed CEO. That's where the real money is. They pay these guys hundreds of millions of dollars when they tank the company. It's insane. You know, I mean, how hard could it be? You make a few speeches, you fly around in the company plane, you blame the previous CEO. I would be great at that. I'll lower the market value of failure and the whole economy will boom. And it's, you know, it's funny, it's true, but it's also really insane. You know, these are the best of times and they are the worst of times. So on and off during that week in Aruba, I kept thinking about those two ideas, the opening lines from Dickens and that joke. And I thought, somewhere in between those two, there's a story of our times. A story of us at our best and a story of us at our worst. And by the time I was ready to get on the plane to go home, I sort of blocked out a story. It's the story of a corporate speechwriter who makes a joke at a party about wanting to be a failed CEO. And to his surprise, someone takes him up on it. All he has to do is go down with the ship. But the same intuition and sense of purpose that made him a good speechwriter, all that kicks in. And he can't help himself. He has to start rewriting the script. And when he discovers that as he's getting rich, 11,000 people will be made poor. And more than that, or just as bad, the financial dealings behind the deal, the reason they want him to come in and fail, is never going to pass SEC muster. So he has to take action because what good is a company plane if you're in jail? And this is a true story. I'm on the plane flying back to Miami, and I've got my laptop open. I'm knocking out, you know, some first exploratory opening lines. I'm trying to write the greatest opening line to a novel ever written, trying to get the paragraph. Woman next to me interrupts. She's obviously been looking over my shoulder, and she says, "So you're writing a novel?" "Yeah, how'd you know?" She said, "Well, I'm a copy editor in New York." And I'm thinking, okay, this is good. "So, how am I doing?" Really? God sent you, didn't he? Because I just had a CEO, 2 division VPs, and a couple of producers tell me I'm a genius. And to put the universe back in balance, somebody had to tell me I suck. You know, in retrospect, when you think about what we do, I should have learned to play the accordion. Because when you write for a living, and then decide you want to write a novel in your spare time, it's kind of insane. But then the life of a speechwriter is insane. It's the best of jobs, it's the worst of jobs. We travel in circles of great power. We have no power of our own. We travel in circles of great wealth. We have no wealth of our own, nothing like that. You know, we check into lavish hotel rooms. We stay up all night in the ballroom trying to get the PowerPoint ready for next morning's speech. Is that a great product name or what? PowerPoint, a product for people who have no power and miss the point. So the life of what we do is kind of insane. I mean, if you think about it, we're court jesters. You know, we play the fool to the boss's King Lear. We're Tonto to his Lone Ranger. We're professional Nick Carraways. The life of a speechwriter is insane, which makes it a great premise for a novel. So I'm going to read a section, hit the right way, from chapter 2, titled appropriately enough, Upgrade. In the first chapter, Paul the speechwriter is in Hong Kong, in the convention center, for a global conference of tractor dealers. 8,000 tractor dealers, every country in the world. Translation into 23 simultaneous languages. And he stops the rehearsal because the CEO is butchering the speech that Paul wrote. So he takes him outside, and he can see that the man is having a panic attack. So he takes him out to a private balcony that overlooks Hong Kong Harbor and tries to find out what's going on. And he learns that, you know, those 5 strategic initiatives on which all of the communications of the entire conference are based? Last week, the board decided not to fund those. And Paul is just, that makes no sense. I mean, here's this company spinning off all this cash, doing good. You've got supply chain problems. Obviously, you have to, wait a minute. Is the board getting the company ready to sell? And the CEO says, I can't answer that, but you see the problem with the speech. And so he stays up all night, rewrites the speech, turns the 5 initiatives into 5 areas of focus. And it's good enough that the next morning, when the CEO gives the speech, he doesn't have a panic attack. So grateful, the CEO invites Paul up to a dinner party in his suite that night. In the suite, in the party, Paul tells the joke about wanting to be the failed CEO. Now it's the next morning. He's out in front of the hotel, waiting to get a cab to the airport, when somebody taps him on the shoulder. This is his Mephistopheles moment. This is the moment he takes his laptop down to the crossroads to be tuned by the devil. Someone tapped Paul on the shoulder. Good morning. Paul turned and found himself looking into the cold, gray eyes of George Sachs, who was the Englishman from last night's dinner. He wore a dove gray flannel suit and one of those Savile Row shirts with a contrasting collar and cuffs. His tie was like a jewel, sparkling with pink and yellow brilliance. Paul, isn't it? Sachs smiled thinly and handed a slim briefcase to the driver of the gold Rolls-Royce. Where are you off to? The airport. Can I give you a ride? Seated in the cavernous business end of the Rolls, swaddled in milky cowhides and surrounded by burled walnut, Paul was impressed. It might just be a car, but it was a car that cost as much as a house. Paul asked Sachs where he was flying. Mumbai, and then on to Geneva. Paul asked Sachs what he did. Oh, nothing very interesting, I'm afraid. He paused as if considering whether to tell Paul more, then spoke as if sharing a secret. I quite enjoyed your story last night. My story? The failed CEO. Oh, with the $25 million. Sachs stared at him for a moment and then smiled. I imagine you must be swamped with projects. Paul shrugged. Sometimes. Your friends at Agro speak very highly of you. You must be very good at what you do. I guess so. And yet the economy must have taken its toll. There was a long pause during which Sachs just sat and smiled at him. Do you know what I think? I think you're underutilized. I should look for a way to use you better. Well, apparently, I'm useful at dinner parties. Peter Cavanaugh told me what you did for him. You identified his problem and helped him fix it. I can think of several companies where I wish I'd had a man like you on our side. Paul was starting to like the direction of this conversation. The rear seat of a Rolls-Royce is a good place for positive thinking and for imagining you could play a slightly larger role in life. It occurs to me you may have significant leadership ability that's not being used. are you talking about the failed CEO thing? It did get my interest, yes. Paul shook his head. I was just kidding. I think there's no such thing as kidding. I think there's a part of you who knows you could be at least as good a leader as any of your CEO clients. No, not at all, Paul lied. He had at times, of course, thought exactly that. Sachs continued as though Paul had not spoken. And you look at what they're taking to the bank, and you think, that could be me. It seemed pointless to refute that. Paul could name 10 clients who were no smarter than he, but who were sitting on millions, even billions, in stock options and bonuses. Just the month before, Lou DeFarcy at IBM had cashed in $40 million in options. Paul remembered the day in the 90s when he surprised Lou by walking into a meeting with a laptop, something Lou had never seen before. Now, not much more than a decade and a half later, the guy was worth maybe $100 million, and Paul was still living month to month. May I ask you a personal question? Sure. How much do you make? It was Paul's belief that he made significantly more than other freelance writers in his business, mostly because he was always working, or always had been. Mid to low six figures, he claimed, exaggerating the top end only slightly in the hope that it would sound more respectable. That's probably in line with others in your line of work, I would think. Oh, damn, another bubble burst. So, Sachs continued, and I'm speaking purely hypothetically here, if one were to come to you and say, look, Paul, I've got such and such an opportunity for you, and it's right up your alley, and you'll be bloody well paid for it, your response would be? Paul tried to gauge the level of bullshit in the question. I don't want to be in a position to fail. It's easy to be seduced by compliments and great offers and get caught up in the excitement and glamour of thinking I'll be a big shot. It's easy to think you could step in and do something better than somebody else, but it's not so easy to do. You're rambling, he thought to himself. All kidding aside, I do not want to be a failed CEO. The statement sort of hung there as the smile on Sachs's face broadened and his tie seemed to grow more brilliant. Not even for $25 million? So I think you can imagine what happens next, although it takes him a couple of weeks. At first, I thought this story was going to be about income equality and the way we think about financial status and the ideas, we have these crazy ideas like if you can't just work a little harder and make a little more money, and if you can't lease a bigger BMW, and if you can't get those valets to park it in front of the restaurant, then there must be something fundamentally wrong with you. I was going to call it affluenza. But as I got into the story, it turned out that there was another story that the character wanted to tell, and that was about speaking truth to power and how hard that is to do, especially when the power is yourself. Because think about it, what would happen if any one of us was handed the keys to the corporation and told we could take it for a spin? And when I say corporation, I mean organization, whatever you're working for. What would happen? Would your proximity to power and decision making give you the chops to run the operation and run it as well as someone who, let's be frank here, may or may not be as intelligent as you are? I have no idea. But what we do can give us the power of insight into the human condition and the ability to coach people to stand for more than just the quarterly earnings of the company or where the candidate is in the polls or where the stock price is on Tuesday. And as I got into the book, it turned out that I was in this interesting position of creating a character, putting him into this alien world of being a CEO, and then coaching him through the experience as if he were a client. And I could do that because I'm a speechwriter to start with, but also because I've been along with a lot of clients on their journey. I have a lot of clients who started as 35-year-old VPs and are now CEOs of major companies. So I've seen what they go through, and that gave me what I needed to develop a character that was a fish out of water in this CEO seat who had to then grow into it really fast. Someone in that position, they have a lot of people who want to be close to them, but not so many they know they can trust. I had a coaching client confide in me that his biggest fear is looking weak. His biggest fear. He's the CEO of a major public financial company. And the fear is not unfounded. He's got an executive team that wants him to make the board do things it doesn't want to do. And he's got a board that wants him to make the executive team do things they don't want to do. And he's stuck in the middle trying to remember what happens to his stock options if he just says, to hell with it. So, lesson number one, as a speech coach and speech writer, it's personal. It's not about us and our skills at rhetoric and clever copy. It's personal. It's not about the 5 strategic initiatives or EBITDA or where the stock needs to be in 2 years. It's personal. It's about a man or a woman and their journey to find the ninja power to move armies that don't want to move against targets that won't stand still. And it's personal because if they fail, they take a lot of people down with them. It's not about the money, it's about being in the arena. It's personal because of the promises they make and the fear that they can't keep them. And it's personal because when we're in that position with them, our job is to be their Yoda and connect them to the force of authentic speaking. And if we fail to do that, then we're shorting them in what we owe them. So here's a second secret that a speechwriter can never forget. People don't care that much about strategy or policy or sales goals or market share. They may say they do, but that's not it. They want to be inspired. They want to be part of something big and meaningful. And our job is to show them what that feels like. Every speech is a hero's journey. But the hero isn't that person up on the stage. The hero is the man or the woman out there in the audience who's looking for something to help them stop selling themselves short so they can become the person they always believed they could be. So, think about this. I read a lot of cognitive science because I'm really interested in what happens at this interface between a speaker and an audience. What is this? How can we make it more resonant? How can we make it more than just a talking head? Sure, it's theater, but what is theater? It's a shared experience of consciousness. So, an experiment. Think about a time you were in a movie theater, surrounded by 200 or 300 other strangers, and you're all laughing as one conscious organism. You're all laughing in that shared moment of joy. What is that? Harold Pinter talks about the moments in his plays as a moment when everyone in the audience is thinking the same thought. How do we do that? How do we make that happen? We in an ontological sense, it's not just, well, let me put it this way. We don't have much control over the audience as speechwriters, but we can exert a force on the speaker. And not just her words, but who she's being on the stage. And our ability to do that really makes a difference. Ontologically speaking, it's not so much what she says that matters, but who she's being that makes all the difference. And as I got into working with this character, it just became clear that that people didn't understand what speech writing was really about. We have a phrase for it, and I use it with all my coaching clients. We have a phrase for it when someone walks up onto a stage and delivers a speech. What is it? When that first cave dweller leapt up on the rock and called the clan to the hunt. What's he doing? Mark Antony walks up and stands up at Caesar's funeral. What's he doing? He's taking a stand. Taking a stand is the fundamental ground of being of every speaker. You walk on stage, you take a stand. It's not enough to just give information. You can do that in an email. It's not enough, God forbid, to justify your salary as VP of packaging, although I'm sure you do a very nice job, but that's not it. A speaker has two duties. You take a stand and you enroll the audience in joining you in that stand. That's it. That's the fundamental duty of a speaker. And I guess you could paraphrase Abraham Lincoln, who said, "The world will little note nor long remember what you said up there, but it will always remember who you were and how you made them feel." So here's something else to think about. Why do we write? I was lucky enough to meet Allen Ginsberg a couple of times when I was younger. And from him I learned that if you think you write for any reason other than to expand your consciousness of the human experience, you just missed the point. You missed the point. We do not write to make some organization better. We don't write, to make a plane better, or we're not some organism that evolved to spin the views of a lobbyist. We're better than that. It's more than that. We write because somewhere down deep inside of us, there's this great, big, huge, gnarly, unanswered question that we're trying to get to the bottom of. We don't write because we have something so deep to say. We write because we're writers. So I'm curious, how many people here knew from the get-go that you wanted to be a writer, those of you who are writers? Show of hands, who knew from childhood that you wanted to write? My earliest memory in life, I'm age 2.5. I'm standing on a sidewalk in Dallas, and I'm trying to prove to somebody that I can write. She's a 6-year-old girl or 7, and I say to her, I've got a paper and a pencil, and I say, I can write. And she says, no, you can't. And so just to show her, I took the pencil and I stuck it straight through that paper and into the palm of my hand. It hurt like hell, but the shock was, I knew how to write. I knew it. What the hell just happened? That girl was the first of many people in my life who have tried to tell me I couldn't write. Some of them I listened to and it cost me. Most of them I just ignored because you can't let critics stop you. Look at Elmore Leonard. I love his books. Elmore Leonard fans here? Great, great author. Do you know that his first novel was rejected by 84 publishers? I want you to think about that for a minute. From 84 rejections. What do you think he was thinking when he wrapped that manuscript up for the 85th time? This time it's going to be different? Except it was. The 85th publisher liked it, bought the book, it sold pretty well. It just shows you can't let anybody stop you. But we do. We're always looking for somebody who's going to stop us and keep us from going on. I learned a little bit about this business and a little bit about the life of a high-placed corporate executive from my father. He was in the aluminum business. He wasn't a tin man. He sold aluminum to the aerospace industry. And he was always the smartest, fastest moving guy, always the youngest guy in the company to get promoted to whatever level he was promoted up to, which happened about every 18 months, which meant we had to move to a new city, which meant, in effect, my dad had two income streams, selling aluminum and flipping houses. So when I was in high school, we were living in San Francisco, and my dad comes in with a book that blew my mind three ways. The first way it blew my mind was what it said. It talked about a future where we would have these things called personal computers that we would ride like motorcycles through the highways of our mind and that would change our consciousness of the world we lived in. This was 10 years before Jobs and Wozniak. Mind-blowing. The second thing that blew my mind was my dad commissioned this work, because this was heavy stuff. You know, the quotes from Timothy Leary and Buckminster Fuller, nothing that a corporation would put out. And then the third thing that blew my mind was this. Dad told me that Don Faben, this insane genius who wrote this book called the Dynamics of Change, Don Faben didn't work for the company, didn't work for any company. He was a freelance writer who wrote these books freelance. And he lived on a houseboat in San Francisco Bay. And right there, I had the vision of the life I wanted to lead. I knew I didn't want to be a corporate executive. I wanted to be a visionary writer living on a houseboat in San Francisco Bay. The only problem was, how the hell do you get to that? I had no clue. I knew it wasn't enough to be able to be good at stringing sentences together, because even in high school I could do that pretty well. But I knew you needed ideas, and at 17 I had no idea where ideas came from, at least not good ones. But that's the journey, isn't it? We set out to find our 10,000 hours. We set out to find our voice. The comic Mark Maron says it takes the average comic 20 years to find his or her voice. Steve Martin spent 10 years playing to empty rooms where no one laughed. When he finally got a break and got a spot on The Tonight Show, he thought he had it made. But the next morning, he goes to the supermarket and a woman recognizes him and says, "Hey, you were on Johnny Carson last night." "Why, yes, I was." "Oh, boy, you were awful." So it was back on the road. 10 years. He set himself a goal. If he didn't make it in 10 years, he was going to quit and give up and go do something else. He was a philosophy major, after all. When he finally had his huge break, got on Saturday Night Live, became an overnight national global sensation, it was 3 months short of that 10-year goal. And that should have been it. Except that his father, who was the head of the Newport Beach, California Board of Realtors, wrote a column in the Realtors newsletter about how bad the show was. He explained in great detail. It wasn't like it was his beat or anything, right? It's the Realtors newsletter. He explained in great detail why his son wasn't funny. You know, and the thing is, even when you know you can't let critics stop you and you have to keep going and don't listen to all the naysayers, that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It's hard. Arthur Miller told a story. He was coming out of rehearsals for A Death of a Salesman, walking down 42nd Street. And he looks up, and coming out of a restaurant just up the street is the man who was his family's next-door neighbor the entire time he was growing up. He knew the guy all of his life as a kid, and the man's two sons were his two best friends. Artie, how the hell are you? I haven't seen you in years." And so, I mean, you got to get, this is the man on whom he based the character of Willie Loman. This is the guy. And the characters of Biff and Happy, he based on his two sons. So he asks about the boys, he asks about the family, and you know, the guy bends his ear for 20 minutes on the sidewalk. And finally the guy runs down and says, "So Artie, what are you doing with yourself these days? And Miller goes, well, I'm a playwright. And the guy goes, oh, well, anything I might have heard of? And he said, well, last year I had a play on Broadway called All My Sons. And the guy goes, wait a minute, you're Arthur Miller? There's always going to be somebody to sell you short. So, 20 years. My journey to find my voice, from the day I realized that I wanted to be a visionary writer living on a houseboat, it took 20 years. Along the way, I wrote comedy, I wrote song lyrics, I wrote magazine articles, I edited a journal for a nonprofit. Everybody said it was great stuff. None of it went anywhere until 1 year it did. In 1 year, after 20 years of working on it, I started selling magazine articles, I started selling short stories, I started getting invited to poetry readings, I quit my day job and was writing ad copy for local businesses. And then this happened. I'm out seeing a client, come back to home, there's a red light on my answering machine, which wasn't happening quite enough at that time. I press the button, and a voice says, hi, my name is Don Runkle. I'm the chief engineer at Chevrolet. Would you please give me a call? So, talk about out of left field. So I call him, and he explains that Road and Track magazine had taken an article that I had sent them on spec. It was an article about how Chevrolet had lost their marketing mojo and what they had to do to get it back. They didn't even send me a rejection letter, and I'd forgotten that I'd written it. But they sent it on to Chevrolet, and he said, we've circulated this to everyone in top management, and we just want to know who you are. So we've been trying to articulate this for 10 years. You did it in 10 pages. What do you do? And I don't know why I said these words. I said, I'm a speechwriter. And he said, well, we need speeches. And the following Tuesday, I was on a plane to Detroit. That one time I didn't sell myself short, and the payoff is huge. 37 years old, I landed in the C-suite, stuck the landing, and I've been there ever since. And I've stayed freelance, partly because I like to take a nap, but also because I'm not here to support the status quo. I'm here to rip it open. I don't tell clients this normally, but I'll share it with you. I'm with the underground. I'm here to open the cells. This is a corporate jailbreak. I want to bust the idea that a job is just a job and stick in a whole new explosive idea that'll blow the doors off business as usual. And here's the idea. A corporation is not what we think it is. An organization, a company, is a giant energy conversion machine. At its best, a company converts hours and dollars into expanded human consciousness and expanded human connectedness. At its best, work is a path of enlightenment. Work is not something that sucks the meaning out of our life. At its best, work is the meaning of life. And I'm here to rattle the cage of any leader who doesn't get that and lead like he's a human being first and a leader, a manager second. And like Paul in my book, I really believe that a company can be the ultimate expression of power to the people. And I believe that the greatest leadership song ever written was All You Need Is Love, closely followed by Dancing in the Streets. Now, about that houseboat. You know what? It turns out they are very damp. They take a lot of maintenance, and then they sink, which would suck. So I make a life in the hills outside of Austin, Texas with my wife, Jean, our dogs, and a pretty good wine cellar. I said earlier that I don't know what makes a great speechwriter. But let me leave you with this thought. It takes talent, of course. You need to be able to listen. You need to trust your intuition and be radically open to what wants to happen next. You better have a brain full of stories and the ability to synthesize them into something that we haven't heard before. But most of all, You have to have a passion for the hero's journey, and you have to have a passion for helping people find the journey of their own. If you can do that, then you can write a good speech. A good speech tells us something we don't know. A good speech shows us something we haven't seen before. A good speech makes us want to find out more about your topic. A good speech does all of that. But a great speech, oh, no. A great speech doesn't show and tell. It doesn't share. A great speech doesn't educate. A great speech destroys you. It reaches inside and rips your heart out, and in this place it leaves a bigger heart, a heart that's beating and burning with a desire to stand up and be counted. You can do that in a speech, then you're a great speechwriter. Look, I'm the cap note speaker for this conference. I had to look that up. What that means is the keynote speaker, she kicked the conference off, set the tone. Lisa Muscatine was great. You know, and her job was, you came a long way, you spent a lot of money, you took time out from important things you had to do. Her job was to make you feel glad you came. My job, and I only had an hour to do it, was to make you feel glad it's over. You've got work to do. You've got speeches to write, you've got a world to change. It is an awesome responsibility to be a speechwriter. Don't sell yourself short. Make it a moment of theater. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, David.